What is up, engine heads? Today we're comparing three different kinds of V8 engines. A crossplane V8 as found in the previous generation C7 Z06 Corvette and in pretty much every American muscle car ever made. A flatplane V8 as found in the brand new recently announced C8 Z06 Corvette and in exotic cars like Ferraris or the Porsche 918 Spyder, for example. Now, just as we're saying hello to the brand new C8 Z06, we're also saying goodbye to the Mustang Shelby GT350 because Ford announced that it's ending its production this fall. So it's a good opportunity to also explore this engine, which is also a flatplane V8, but it's a complete oddball flatplane V8, as you'll see in this video. By comparing these three different kinds of V8s, we're going to see how something as simple as a different distribution of crank pins can influence all the key aspects of an engine's performance and design. So let's get started. Obviously, the first thing we have to do is to explain what crossplane and flatplane actually means. I'm pretty sure most of you already know this, so I'll be quick about it. In a crossplane engine, we have all the crank pins where the conrods attach arranged in two planes. These two planes are perpendicular to each other, they're crossing each other, hence the name crossplane. The first and second pin are 90 degrees apart from each other. The third and fourth pin are also 90 degrees apart from each other, and the second and third pin are 180 degrees apart from each other. Now, in a flat plane engine, we have the first and fourth, and the second and third pins 180 degrees apart from each other, resulting in all of the pins resting together in a single plane. Now, the easiest way to understand the engine balance of a V8 is to observe it as two inline fours, because that's what it essentially is. Two inline fours fused together at 90 degrees to each other. The flatplane V8 consists of two flatplane inline fours, and the crossplane V8 consists of two crossplane inline fours. In fact, the crankshafts also look the same. The flatplane V8 crankshaft is the same as a flatplane inline four crankshaft, only stretched out to accommodate two conrods per single crank pin. Obviously, the same goes for the crossplane crankshaft. So let's start with a flatplane inline 4 configuration. In this configuration, we have an even firing interval of 180 degrees. So a cylinder fires, the engine rotates 180 degrees, a cylinder fires again, 180 degrees again, and so on. An even firing interval is good for engine balance and engine smoothness. Now, in a flatplane V8, we obviously have twice as many cylinders as in the inline 4, which means that we can fire a cylinder every 90 degrees of engine rotation instead. And we do so by alternating between the two cylinder banks of the V8. It goes like this. We fire a cylinder in bank 1, rotate 90 degrees, fire bank 2, rotate 90 degrees, bank 1 again, rotate 90 degrees, bank 2 again, 90 degrees, and so on and so forth. Both the C8 Z06 and the GT350 alternate between cylinder banks for each cylinder firing. They number their cylinders differently and they have a different firing order, but neither of these engines fires two cylinders in one bank in succession. This is good not just for engine balance, but also for performance, because it gives the exhaust pulses in one bank enough time to clear the exhaust manifold before the arrival of another exhaust pulse. Stacking up exhaust pulses is bad for performance because it increases back pressure in the exhaust manifold. Another benefit of this is that it makes exhaust scavenging simple and predictable due to the even spacing of the exhaust pulses. Now, if you're unfamiliar with exhaust scavenging and back pressure, I do have a video where I explain this step by step in an easy to understand way. Now, the crossplane inline 4 does not have an even firing interval. Instead of firing every 180 degrees like the flatplane, it actually fires like this. We fire, rotate 180 degrees, fire, rotate 90 degrees, fire, 180 degrees, fire, 270 degrees, and then the interval repeats itself on and on. Now, this unevenness from the crossplane inline 4 gets replicated on the crossplane V8, but not in the way you'd expect. The crossplane V8 also has an even firing interval just like the flatplane V8. It fires every 90 degrees of engine rotation. But in the crossplane V8, both cylinder banks experience times when they have two cylinders firing on the same bank in succession. By firing two cylinders on the same bank, one right after the other, we're sending two exhaust pulses down the exhaust manifold in very quick succession. This of course increases back pressure, reduces performance, and complicates the design of the exhaust system on crossplane V8 engines. But this type of firing is what gives the crossplane V8 its very characteristic syncopated potato burble or rumble or whatever you want to call it. It's a very memorable sound loved by many. In contrast to this, the flatplane V8 has a more even sound that climbs more steadily and is often described as screaming when it reaches high RPMs. So to better understand and perceive the sound, here's an audio-visual demonstration along with the firing order from one of my favorite channels on YouTube, followed up by the actual sound of the cars themselves. So the firing order explains the different sound of the crossplane and flatplane V8 engines, as well as the design concerns when it comes to the exhaust systems of these engines. But what about another key feature of the crossplane and flatplane V8s, the redline? In general, you will notice that flatplane V8 engines rev much higher than their crossplane counterparts, and this is explained by engine balance, more specifically primary and secondary engine balance. Now, I have explained primary and secondary engine balance many times in my previous videos, so if you're unfamiliar with the concepts, I suggest that you watch this video, because here you will have a very simple, intuitive, step-by-step explanation together with graphs, so I promise you will understand primary and secondary engine balance. So with that in mind, in this video we're doing a super quick explanation of primary and secondary engine balance. If you want to skip it, click here. Primary engine balance is related to the reciprocating mass of the piston inside the engine. When the piston reaches its top or bottommost position of travel, TDC or BDC, and when it changes direction, it's going to exert a force onto the engine. You can easily experience this force yourself by taking any object, trying to rapidly move it up to a certain point and then rapidly down again. The object is going to exert a force on your hand that's in the direction in which it was traveling before you forced it to change direction. The piston does the same thing to the engine, and it's trying to move the whole engine upwards when it changes direction at TDC. To restore balance, you need another piston that's doing the opposite thing of the first piston to cancel it out. Primary forces point upwards at TDC and downwards at BDC because that's the direction in which the piston was traveling before it was forced to change direction by the connecting rod and the crankshaft. Secondary engine balance comes from the geometric relationship between the piston, connecting rod, and the crankshaft. When the piston is moving from TDC to the halfway point of its travel to half of the stroke, the connecting rod is going to move from being fully upright to a fully angled position. Of course, as the connecting rod angles, it becomes shorter in relation to the piston and the crankshaft. By assuming this angled position, the connecting rod is going to further shorten the distance between the piston and the crankshaft, and it's going to add acceleration onto the piston. But when the engine rotates from the halfway point of the stroke down to bottom dead center, the connecting rod is again going to assume its fully upright position, and by doing so, it's going to actually slow the piston down a bit, or in other words, take a bit of acceleration away from the piston. Because the connecting rod is going to remove a bit of acceleration from the piston whenever it's assuming its upright position, secondary forces always point upright, both the top and bottom dead center. And because the conrod is going to add a bit of acceleration to the piston whenever it's assuming its angled position, secondary forces always point downward whenever there's a piston at the halfway point of the stroke. Because secondary forces only amount to the additional acceleration created by the changing angle of the connecting rod, they are usually much smaller in magnitude compared to primary forces, which stem from the entire mass of the piston and the regular up and down movement of the piston. In most engines, secondary forces are about 1/4 of primary forces. Also, primary forces occur once per engine revolution or at the speed of the crankshaft, while secondary forces occur twice per engine revolution or at twice the speed of the crankshaft. So here we can see the flatplane and the crossplane and their primary and secondary forces. As you can see, the flatplane has perfect primary but poor secondary balance, while the crossplane has poor primary but good secondary balance. Let's explain why. As we said, primary forces point up at TDC and down at BDC, so clearly in the flatplane the forces cancel each other out because they're of opposite direction and equal magnitude. Now the situation is different in the crossplane. First of all, we have to observe that the second and the third piston do not contribute to a primary imbalance, and this is because a piston reaches maximum velocity near the midpoint of its stroke. Although velocity is very high, for a very brief moment of time it's constant. Constant velocity means zero acceleration, and zero acceleration means zero force. Now the first and the fourth piston are generating forces of equal magnitude but opposite in direction, so they cancel each other out. But there's a problem, and the problem is the perpendicular distance between these two forces, which creates a rocking couple. And a rocking couple is two forces, equal in magnitude, opposite in direction, separated by a perpendicular distance. The effects of a rocking couple can be easily observed by applying equal force but in different direction at the ends of an object. And as you will see, the object will rotate. And that's the same thing that the primary imbalance is trying to do to crossplane V8 engine. It's trying to rotate the engine as it's running. Of course, this creates a vibration that must be engineered out of the engine. As you can see, when a piston is at TDC, the crankshaft counterweight does indeed oppose it. But when the piston leaves TDC and goes to the halfway point of its stroke, we can see that the counterweight and the piston now point in different directions and thus cannot balance each other out. But things are different in the 90-degree V. When one piston is at TDC, it's balanced out by the counterweight. When that piston moves to the halfway point of its stroke, then the counterweight can balance out the other piston. And that's because the angle between the cylinders, and thus the pistons, is 90 degrees. And as we said, primary vibrations and imbalances occur at the speed of the crankshaft, which means that we can use the crankshaft itself to balance out the primary rocking couple of the crossplane V8. This is most often done simply by adding mass onto the crankshaft, mostly to the first and the last counterweight, because these best oppose the rocking couple of the crossplane V8. And the result is restored primary balance in the crossplane V8. Now, thanks to the crankshaft, the crossplane V8 has perfect primary and perfect secondary balance, leading to a very balanced and very smooth engine. But the price is a much heavier crankshaft, which increases inertia and means it's more difficult to spin the crankshaft up to speed, which reduces engine responsiveness and limits max RPM. A heavy crankshaft with massive counterweights would also flex a lot more at very high RPM, which would dramatically increase bearing wear and lead to eventual engine failure. As you can see, the crankshaft in a Ferrari V8 or in the Z06 doesn't have thick counterweights, which results in an overly much lighter crankshaft, which can easily reach higher RPMs. So that's the answer to the difference in the red line. A heavy crankshaft simply can't rev as high as a lighter crankshaft. Sometimes you'll hear or read how crossplane V8 engines inherently have more torque. Now, it's important to understand that the crossplane configuration itself doesn't produce more torque in any way. Instead, this has a lot to do with mean piston speed, or the average speed of the piston during the engine's operation, during a single stroke of the engine. In general, overly high piston speeds must be avoided to reduce engine stresses. And mean piston speed is a function of engine stroke and engine RPM. The higher the RPM and the longer the stroke, the more piston speed there will be. Since crossplane V8 engines can't rev high anyway, engineers have the opportunity to instead increase the stroke. And increasing the engine stroke is often done by increasing the stroke of the crankshaft, which increases the leverage on the crankshaft, which increases torque. On the other hand, because flatplane V8 engines rev very high, they can rely on RPM to achieve their target horsepower numbers, because horsepower is essentially torque times RPM. But because they rev very high, they can't risk overly high piston speeds, so they must sacrifice some of their engine stroke. And this results in most flatplane V8 engines being very over-square. They have a large bore and a small stroke. The low red line is also the reason why engine designers can use a cam-in-block pushrod system for actuating the valves in a crossplane V8 engine. Pushrods are long and thin, so they easily bend under the stresses of overly high RPM and the stiff valve springs needed to support this high RPM. But pushrod designs, unlike dual overhead cam designs, result in a much more compact engine, which gives designers the opportunity to stuff more displacement into the same engine bay. Pushrod engines also use only 2 valves per cylinder. Now, 2 valves would have trouble flowing the volume of air needed to support very high RPM. However, they are great for air velocity, which is another factor which increases low RPM torque. So primary balance explains the red line and other design features of these two engines. Now let's move on to secondary balance. As we said, secondary forces point up at BDC and TDC, and they point down when a piston is mid-stroke. So we can see that in the crossplane V8, secondary forces actually cancel out in the same way that primary forces cancel out in the flatplane V8. On the other hand, in the flatplane V8, we have all secondary forces pointing upward because we have 4 pistons coming to a stop together, which means that we have 4 conrods getting upright again and taking away acceleration from all 4 pistons, resulting in a pretty poor secondary balance and an up and down vibration as the engine is running. But as we said, secondary vibrations are smaller than primary ones, which is why they're often left unbalanced in V8 engines. Instead, they're addressed by stiffening up the block or cleverly engineering the engine mounts to reduce the amounts of buzzing vibrations reaching the occupants inside the vehicle. Despite this, a flat plane will vibrate more and will not be as smooth as a crossplane. And you can actually feel this if you try to feel it and if you think about it, but it's usually taken as something to be expected from high-performance exotic vehicles with very high redlines. So now that we understand the primary and secondary balance basics of the crossplane and the flatplane, let's look at the flatplane oddball that is the Ford Voodoo engine inside the Mustang GT350. So here we have a regular V8 flatplane crankshaft. And then here we have the Ford Voodoo crankshaft. As you can see, instead of up, down, down, up, the Voodoo has up, down, down. Now, if you ask any sort of engine designer about their first thought on a crankshaft like this, they would probably tell you it's stupid. Why? Well, because, as you know, a flat-plane V8 crankshaft has perfect primary balance at the expense of a poor secondary balance. Now, the Voodoo crankshaft actually sacrifices perfect primary balance in order to gain nothing. The problem is that the up-down thing creates a rocking couple. Yes, we have forces of equal magnitude and opposite direction, so they could cancel each other out, but they can't because of the peculiar configuration. They're offset from each other, so they create a rocking couple, which of course needs to be addressed, and the Voodoo engine addresses it in the same way that a crossplane addresses its primary imbalance, and that's by adding weight onto the crankshaft counterweights. So the Voodoo engine is a flat-plane V8 that doesn't have the lightweight rev-happy crankshaft of a flat-plane V8. What about secondary balance? Maybe that's good? Well, no, it also sucks like on any flat plane because we have 4 pistons coming to a stop together at the same time. So what's the point of this engine? Why would Ford do this? Well, actually, they never officially answered it. In the magazines and press releases, you could read all about the usual flat plane benefits, like improved scavenging and so on, but nobody really officially talked about the kooky crankshaft. And although they never officially explained it, they did drop some hints. Probably the most revealing thing was what was said by the late Chris Svensson, who was Ford's design director back then, and this is what he said during the unveiling of the GT350 back in December of 2014. Everyone was a little worried that the flat crank V8 might sound like a Ferrari, but it doesn't sound like a Ferrari at all. It sounds like a Mustang, but it sounds like a Mustang that is eager to go. It's not that stereotypical lazy American V8. Now, these words are very important because they reveal that the sound character of the engine was very important for Ford, and that makes sense. A Mustang buyer, after all, expects Mustang-like sounds from a Mustang. It would be kind of silly to have a Mustang sound like a Ferrari, just like it would be silly to have a Ferrari sound like a Mustang. Now, it makes sense for the C8 Z06 to sound like a Ferrari because it's placing itself on the market as an alternative to a Ferrari. It's mid-engined and has many other supercar features. It's more American exotic than American muscle. But the Mustang is still definitely American muscle. But it was built also as a track car from the onset, and the additional 2,000 or so RPM you get from a flat plane can make a world of difference on the track. So Ford had to build a American muscle car that sounds like a cross plane but has the RPM of a flat plane. How did they do it? Well, here's the first clue, and it's the headers of the Voodoo engine, and as you can see, they're totally weird. This is obviously not a 4x2x1 thing or a 4x1 thing, it's some sort of weird 4x3 thing, which is, I don't know, you don't really see this on engines. Obviously, cylinders 1 and 3 are joined into a single pipe, whereas cylinders 2 and 4 are normal. So why make the tube of the first cylinder longer than all the other cylinders? Well, unequal headers are a great way to make engines rumble. Older Subaru engines rumbled because they had unequal headers. More modern Subaru engines don't rumble because they have equal headers. But there's a problem with these headers. If we overlay them on a regular flat plane with a typical Ferrari firing order, here's what happens. As you can see, the first and third cylinder in each bank fire just 180 degrees apart from each other. And because these two cylinders are joined into a single pipe, we get the exhaust pulses actually stacking up, increasing back pressure and reducing performance. Now, if we switch up the firing order with that of the Voodoo, we can see that the issue is gone. Now there's ample time between the firing of the first and third cylinder in each cylinder bank, so there's no back pressure issues. Now, Ford could have likely solved this problem by using simply a different firing order and a regular up, down, up configuration, but that would have likely resulted again in a different soundtrack, which was probably found to be less than desirable. If you don't believe me that the unequal headers play a key part in making the GT350 sound the way it does, have a listen to this. This is a stock GT350 with the OEM headers. And then here's a GT350 with this. These are aftermarket Cooks 4x1 headers. Reminds you of a Ferrari, doesn't it? Yeah. So the headers did the sound thing, but there's another clue, and actually Ford engineers hinted at this during various interviews, and it's this. So first, here's the engine of the C8 Z06. Here's a Ferrari flat plane. Then here's the Porsche Spyder 918 flat plane. And then here's the Voodoo flat plane. Why is the Voodoo the odd one out? Yeah, obviously all the other engines have twin intake plenums with twin throttle bodies, whereas the flatplane Voodoo has a single intake plenum with a single very large throttle body, which is a key trait of crossplane V8 engines. An engine's intake is obviously very important for its performance, but also for its sound, and it's very possible that the regular flatplane configuration of up, down, down, up worked less than favorably with a single intake plenum. So what Ford did is that they flipped the crank pins around to get around this issue. So what was the end result of all of this? Well, it was an engine with extremely complex vibrations that almost got cancelled, but Ford engineers actually persevered and they made a flat plane that sounds like a crossplane. And they even gave it a red line and everything else, and honestly, to me, this is just a very personal, subjective opinion, and interpretation of engine sounds is definitely subjective, but to me, the Voodoo actually sounds better than both the regular crossplanes as well as the Ferrari type flat planes. It sounds like a crossplane that lost its mind and went berserk. It's a very, very characteristic and for me, a very impressive sound. So definitely kudos to Ford engineers for building something truly different, and I'm for one am sad to see this car go. And there you have it, two different V8 configurations and a nut job of an engine. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it helps you better understand the different types of V8 awesomeness. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the D4H channel.